Hey YouTube, welcome back to the Wth Alliance. What are we doing in today's video, Jacob?
Educating people about ASD.
So if you want to find out a little bit about ASD, what life is like on the spectrum, and provide some information on how you might be able to better serve those that are on the spectrum, stick around. So, ASD. So ASD, also known as autism spectrum disorder, is a disability that is caused in the brain. People with ASD often have social and communication issues, and interactions and restriction and repetitive behaviour come with that. What else do you know about ASD, Jacob?
People on the autism ASD spectrum have trouble looking people in the eye, social skill. You mess with their routine, they don't tend to like that, and they tend to play with the same toy or different things like that.
ASD is also interesting because it's somewhat of a invisible disability. It's people with ASD often don't look too different from those that don't have ASD. The level of severity that someone might have ASD can differ. Some people might be completely non-verbal, and then we can have others that are extremely high functioning, that are very intellectual with their words, or may even be, experts at mathematics and science. So it's not something that's just obvious and easy to spot, which makes it quite difficult for people to interact with at times. What are some famous people that we know that have ASD?
Bill Gates, Albert Einstein, and Jerry Seinfeld.
Yeah, that was an interesting one to find out. I didn't realise that Jerry Seinfeld identified himself as having ASD. Elon Musk also did as well. So some of the characteristics that you can see in those people are, one, they're very, very smart at what they do, and they're very particular and meticulous about the way they do things, which has led to their success. So, sometimes you could see being on the ASD as not a disability, but a superpower in their instance, because it's allowed them to have success in their career. Also, we've seen ASD quite a lot recently in TVs and movies. We've seen a lot more characters being added. We've also seen a lot of shows written specifically about being on the spectrum. So who are some famous characters that we know in popular TV that are...
Sheldon Cooper, who was in The Big Bang Theory. Sam, who was in Atypical. Yeah.
And then I believe that Dr. Sean Murphy from The Good Doctor, which I haven't seen, also is on the spectrum. And then there's also some TV shows where we've seen people with the disability in real life be in it. So shows like Love on the Spectrum. And I believe there's 2 versions of that. Yeah, and we've also seen... So we've seen characters portrayed, and then we've seen shows specifically come out that's showing life on the spectrum, even though they do include actors. So you mentioned Atypical, so that's a show about a gentleman on the spectrum wanting to find love.
And loves penguins.
Yes, he does love penguins. So he's a prime example of having this kind of fixational activities and behaviours that are, atypical to someone on the spectrum. Talked about some characteristics of being on the spectrum. We've talked about some people that are famous that are on the spectrum. But one thing that we haven't really talked about yet is, what life is like being on the spectrum. So this is something I can't speak from behalf of, but for yourself, what is it like being on the spectrum, and is it much different than that of someone not on the spectrum, or is there a lot of differences to it?
It has its good days and bad days. On its good days, I think it's better being on the spectrum. You see things better, and personally, I think I'm the normal person. People that aren't on the spectrum are the crazy people. On its bad days, I kind of feel that society kind of doesn't understand me, and people don't really have the education or the understanding to love me for who I am, and it's kind of different going by days.
So you mentioned about being educated. So we talked about this off camera, that growing up, it wasn't something that we were taught in school. It wasn't, a subject like maths or science to learn how to interact with someone on the spectrum, or even how to understand it. Obviously that would be nice, but it is quite a difficult thing to educate everyone on. But maybe we might be able to give some fine points or some little things that people could work with. So, what is something that you think is important for someone not on the spectrum to know and might help them interact with yourself or another person on the spectrum?
Judgmental and to, because it is a spectrum, treat the person with the disability equally and not talk down to that person.
So, my tip for that would be, you never know what's going on in someone's life. There might be a disability, it might be just they're having a bad day. But if you don't know what's going on with someone, then it's best not to assume and just to treat someone with dignity and respect. So if you're trying to communicate something with someone and they don't seem to be responding in the way you'd expect, that's no excuse to then start harass or bully that person. Instead, you might have to simplify your request just because you don't know. The person in front of you might be non-verbal because they're on the spectrum. They might be having a stroke. Like you don't really know. So I guess sometimes you might have to not just assume that everyone can understand everything you're saying all the time. I'm sure there's been circumstances where you've probably gone to the shop and someone's asked you a question and you've taken a second or two just to try and process what it is, but that person has been rude to you because of that, or they've just moved on and ignore your request because they haven't understood that you're still processing what you want to say or what they've said to you.
Yes.
So, sometimes it requires just, taking that extra second and working out what's going on and just, don't accept that everyone knows everything. Like you wouldn't go to a foreign country and start speaking English and get angry at the person for not knowing what you're saying. They speak a different language to you, so this is no different. Someone on the spectrum, might think in a different language as such than you, so don't assume that everyone processes things the same way.
Yeah, and I guess with the person with the disability as well, they need to be educated on, assume that the person knows that they understand them.
Yeah, exactly. Because I know we have some conversations sometimes, whether it's about, a show or it could be about sport or something happening in the news that, we don't necessarily have differing opinions, but you have your opinion and it's not my right to go, well, that's wrong. I need to change it. I have to be aware that, in your mind, that's the way that you interpret it. And I've got to find a way to try and either interpret it your way or to be able to, educate you on, other people's perspectives. And that doesn't mean that, you're rude or ignorant or doesn't understand. It's just, you've obviously got your own way of thinking and, maybe it's different than how I would think of things. And as you said before, you think that for you have the normal way of thinking and myself and others have the odd way of thinking. So it's trying to interpret each person's version of things.
Yeah.
What other tips could you give to someone that, may not have any experience of interacting with someone on the spectrum?
Meet someone that is different. Maybe do some research or get to know that person before making judgment calls or treat them with no respect. Actually do research into what the behaviors are, because we actually did some research into behaviors and there were a lot of dates for like if the person within like 9 months doesn't show eye contact, what was the issue there?
Yeah, there's definitely lots of little diagnostic signs that, specialists might use to diagnose a young person as being on the spectrum. So it's worth being educated on that. I think myself having education that I can generally spot, whether someone is or isn't on the spectrum, quite easily, whether it's through noticing physical things they're doing or even just through conversation. I admit I'm not always going to be right and I'm not going to assume, but being educated in it can help because it might make the difference between, let's say you're working at, your local shop and you're at checkout and then someone comes up to you. If you can notice some little things, you might go, I think this person might be on the spectrum. It might help how you then interact with them for the rest of the conversation, opposed to thinking, this person is, rude or they're ignoring me or they're strange or whatever, but being able to, even if you're wrong, it'll at least, it doesn't hurt to over assume, if you know what I mean. Like if you're overly cautious because you think someone might be on the spectrum, it's not going to be as bad as under assuming and then making that person feel bad.
Yeah.
Like no one's going to take offense if you start, slowing down your conversation or simplifying what you're saying or trying to give someone assistance. Like it would take an odd person to take offense to that, but by not doing those things to someone that might require it is going to be a lot worse.
Because we had a discussion about, I think schools should educate people or students on the spectrum, and you think they don't have enough resources or time?
Oh, I think it'd be useful to teach them, but it then becomes a matter of, which disabilities do we educate someone on? Because if you educate someone on one, then you have to educate someone on all, and it obviously takes a lot of time, but maybe some that, might be commonly seen in schools. So it again becomes hard, because if you then have someone new come to your school and they have a particular disability, and then you educate everyone on that disability, does that person then feel, singled out, and they go, well, now everyone knows about me, like, am I now a target for bullying? It's a very tough line to try and work out what you do, but I think overall education would be good, especially, ASD, as it is, fairly common. I don't know if it's becoming more common or it's more spoken about, but there's definitely seems to be a more presence of it in Australia. I think more and more you speak to people that identify as being on the spectrum, or they refer to their children or family members as being on the spectrum, where I think back 10 years ago when I was at school, I didn't really remember knowing too many people or it being spoken of. I think it makes a difference. And do you think that, obviously we're both not at school now, but do you think that there seems to be a bit more, from what we can observe, understanding or acknowledgement of people on the spectrum?
I like to think so, because when I was at school, that was the reason why they gave, because they thought students would bully the kids, but I don't know.
It's very hard to tell, and I'm sure there is always going to be bad people out there that will bully someone irrespective of how much education they have. But I would like to think that the wider population, there's been a change. I definitely feel, in the media, if you were to openly bully someone about anything, whether it was their gender, race, or disability, you're probably going to get struck down by a lot of people. So that, to me, signals that there's a bit of a changing of the guard, that people are becoming a bit more educated and respectful.
So you think it's easier to educate people about, like, the Indigenous community instead of the disability community, because there's more disabilities instead of the Indigenous community? Because I learned about that at school, and for me, being in my background, it was frustrating. Personally, I felt a little bit discriminated against.
I don't know if one's easier than the other, because someone could turn around and say, well, in terms of Australian Indigenous people, they could say, well, there's hundreds of different languages and different cultural things, so you could argue and say there's more Indigenous groups than there is disabilities. I don't know if that's correct, but I don't know about that. But Indigenous history and culture,
I know, is it important?
I'm not saying it's not important or one's more important than the other. I guess history is something that gets taught in school. So, if you're in America, you're going to learn about their founding fathers. And if you're in England, you're probably going to do the same. So that's us learning about our country's history. So it's a bit different than a disability. So there's probably a reason why we learn that, because it is history. But I do think it could be something that could be added into schools, and possibly already is, but I don't know if there's a direct comparison for me between learning about a country's history and learning about a disability, because I guess disabilities change and our understanding of them change, where history's, it's been and done. You can only, unless you discover something new, it's not ever changing. So, I think they're both important, but to compare them, I find it a bit hard.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, so it's something that could definitely be in school. I honestly think there must be some kind of a change, because I see a lot more, diversity in friendship groups. I guess I see a lot more with the NDIS changing, how people with disabilities are, getting to be out and about in the community. So I think there's definitely a change. Whether or not people are more educated or they're just more understanding, I would think that life now, growing up on the spectrum in schools, would probably be easier than when you and I are at school. But again, it's hard to say. There's always going to be bad people that are going to make fun of those that, don't deserve it.
Yeah. So I guess bottom line, educate and always try to understand different backgrounds and different things that people go through.
Yeah, I think if you don't understand something, the best thing to do is learn about it.
Yeah.
And then if you don't have time to learn about it, then just try and, keep it as simple as possible. I'll use the example of going overseas. If I went to a country that I didn't understand their culture, I'm not just going to start doing things that I think might offend them. I'm going to try and play it as safe as possible. You're not going to start wearing singlets and, revealing clothes and things that you don't know are appropriate there, and you're not going to use foul language because it could be offensive. So you might go, well, I'm going to be very simple. So I think being simple and, trying to account for everyone is probably the safer bet. And you're still going to get it wrong. We talk about, it's a bit different, but the whole gender debate and how people identify, you're going to get that wrong. You're going to call people by the wrong pronouns, but by at least trying to learn or being as simple as you can helps. So if you suspect that someone might have any form of disability, then try to accommodate that or learn about it opposed to discriminating, because there's never really an excuse to discriminate.
And who do you think is the most important people that need educating, the police force and other important things as well? I think anyone in like essential services or things like that, it's important because they're going to interact, like if you work in a hospital, for instance, I think you're going to interact with a lot of people with different disabilities. Police for sure, which I'm sure they do receive some training, but whether or not they receive sufficient training, I don't know. But it is very important because, you might get called out to something as a police officer, and, you don't know whether the person it might be their disability causing them to act that way, or whether, it could be drugs, it could be alcohol, it could be something else. So you need to be able to educate yourself so that you can distinguish that, because you don't want to, arrest someone or take someone down for being violent because you think they're intoxicated, where in fact they have a disability and people aren't understanding what's going on for them. Yeah.
And it's very similar to, security guards at, pubs and clubs having to be aware of the difference between being drunk and maybe being diabetic and having a diabetic episode. They have to be able to know the difference, because someone might be requiring assistance and they think that they're just drunk, so they throw them out on the street, but in fact they're having an episode and they require, medical assistance. So it's important to be educated, definitely, when you're in a role that, like an essential servicing role.
Well, thank you for watching. Hope you found this video educational and informative. Let us know what other videos you would like us to do. Definitely would like to do a NDIS video. Look forward to seeing that. Let the force be with you. As always, you are awesome. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.